group of scientists in Germany, deep underground in a limestone cave, brush away dirt from what appears to be just another old bone. But as they work, they realize they're holding something extraordinary: the remains of our closest extinct relatives, beings who walked this continent for over 400,000 years before vanishing mysteriously around 40,000 years ago. These weren't primitive brutes. They buried their dead, created art, and survived ice ages that would challenge even modern humans. But here's where it gets fascinating. Just as these Neanderthals disappeared, something else arrived. New humans, our direct ancestors, carrying revolutionary tools, creating stunning cave art, and possessing a drive that would transform an entire continent. What happened when these two species met? Did they fight? Did they merge? The DNA in your cells might hold the answer, because if you're of European descent, you're likely carrying traces of that ancient encounter. This is just the beginning of Europe's hidden origin story. Most people think Europe's story starts with Greeks and Romans, but the truth goes back tens of thousands of years to ice-covered landscapes where our ancestors fought for survival against creatures that would dwarf today's wildlife. They faced down cave lions, woolly rhinos, and mammoths, developing innovations that laid the groundwork for everything that would follow. And here's what will shock you. The Europe we know today, its borders, its cultures, its very identity, was forged not by the grand civilizations you learned about in school, but by a series of catastrophic collapses, forgotten peoples, and chance encounters that could have gone very differently. The fall of Rome wasn't just an ending, it was a chaotic rebirth that created the medieval world through what historians call the barbarian invasions. But these so-called barbarians weren't savage destroyers. They were sophisticated peoples who preserved knowledge, built kingdoms, and laid the foundations of modern European nations. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll see that Europe's origin story isn't the neat narrative of progress you might expect. It's a thrilling saga of survival, innovation, and transformation that's still shaping our world today. The story of Europe begins not with marble columns or medieval castles, but in the depths of time when our planet looked nothing like it does today. 65 million years ago, massive tectonic forces were reshaping the Earth's surface, slowly pushing continents together and pulling them apart. What we now call Europe was emerging from ancient seas, its mountains rising as Africa collided with the Eurasian landmass, creating the Alps and Pyrenees through unimaginable geological violence. But it was the ice that truly sculpted Europe's destiny. Beginning around 2.6 million years ago, massive ice sheets advanced and retreated across the continent in cycles, each one lasting tens of thousands of years. These weren't just cold spells, they were world-altering events that carved valleys, created rivers, and determined where humans could live. The ice sheets were so massive they locked up enough water to lower sea levels by over 400 feet, exposing land bridges and creating entirely different coastlines. When the ice retreated, it left behind a landscape of fertile plains, river valleys, and natural harbors that would become the stage for human civilization. The great European rivers, the Rhine, Danube, and Volga, were highways carved by melting glaciers, connecting distant regions and enabling the movement of people, goods, and ideas that would define European culture. Into this transformed landscape came the first Europeans, though they looked nothing like the people who live there today. Around 800,000 years ago, early humans ventured out of Africa and began settling across Europe. These weren't our direct ancestors. They were part of a separate branch of humanity that would evolve into the Neanderthals, a species uniquely adapted to survive in Europe's harsh Ice Age environment. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals dominated Europe. They were shorter and stockier than modern humans, with massive muscles and brains that were actually larger than ours. Living in small bands, they hunted enormous Ice Age animals, cave bears that stood over 10 feet tall, woolly rhinos with 6-foot horns, and Irish elk with antlers spanning 12 feet. They developed sophisticated tools, controlled fire, and created the first known art in Europe. Handprints and geometric patterns painted on cave walls in Spain that date back over 65,000 years. But Neanderthals faced a challenge that would ultimately seal their fate. Around 45,000 years ago, a new kind of human arrived in Europe. These modern humans, our direct ancestors, had evolved in Africa and were spreading across the globe with revolutionary speed. They brought with them advanced stone tools, complex social structures, and an unprecedented capacity for symbolic thought and artistic expression. The meeting between Neanderthals and modern humans was one of the most consequential encounters in human history. For several thousand years, the two species coexisted across Europe. sometimes competing for the same caves and hunting grounds, sometimes apparently living side by side. Recent genetic research reveals that they didn't just coexist, they interbred. If you're of European descent, roughly 2 to 4% of your DNA comes from these ancient Neanderthal encounters. But by 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals had vanished completely, leaving behind only traces in our genes and scattered archaeological sites. What caused their extinction remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Climate change, disease, and competition with modern humans all likely played roles, but the exact combination of factors that ended their 400,000-year reign over Europe continues to puzzle scientists. The modern humans who replaced them transformed Europe in ways that still echo today. They created the stunning cave art of Lascaux and Altamira, painting detailed images of the animals they hunted and abstract symbols whose meanings we're still trying to decode. They developed new hunting techniques that allowed them to take down the massive megafauna of Ice Age Europe, and they created sophisticated social networks that spanned hundreds of miles. These early Europeans weren't just surviving, they were innovating at a pace never seen before in human history. They invented the first musical instruments, carved intricate figurines, and developed complex burial rituals that suggest they were grappling with concepts of death and the afterlife. By 30,000 years ago, they had established trade networks that moved shells from the Mediterranean to sites in Central Europe, demonstrating social connections across vast distances. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, Europe's landscape transformed once again. Rising sea levels created the familiar coastlines we know today, while forests spread across lands that had been frozen tundra. The megafauna that had dominated Ice Age Europe, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, gradually disappeared, forcing human populations to adapt to entirely new environments. This transition marked the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution in Europe, as hunter-gatherer societies began adopting agriculture and settling into permanent villages. But this wasn't a simple progression from primitive to civilized. Many hunter-gatherer societies in Europe were highly sophisticated, with complex social structures, impressive monuments like Stonehenge, and extensive trade networks. The transition to farming was gradual and uneven, creating a patchwork of different lifestyles across the continent. The agricultural revolution brought new challenges and opportunities. Settled farming communities could support larger populations, but they were also more vulnerable to disease, warfare, and environmental disasters. As populations grew, competition for land intensified, leading to the development of more complex social hierarchies and the first warrior elites who would eventually become the aristocratic classes of later European societies. By 5,000 years ago, Europe was home to diverse cultures that were beginning to work with metals, particularly bronze, which gave its name to the Bronze Age. This period saw the rise of Europe's first truly complex civilizations, cultures that would lay the groundwork for everything that followed. The Bronze Age Mediterranean was dominated by two remarkable civilizations that most people have never heard of, yet their influence shaped European culture for millennia. On the island of Crete, the Minoans built Europe's first cities, complete with multi-story palaces, advanced plumbing systems, and vibrant frescoes depicting dolphins, bull-leaping ceremonies, and mysterious goddess figures. The Minoan civilization flourished from about 3000 to 1100 BCE, creating a sophisticated maritime empire that connected Europe to Africa and Asia through trade networks spanning the entire Mediterranean. Their ships carried Cretan pottery, textiles, and metalwork to Egypt and the Near East, while bringing back luxury goods that filled their impressive palaces. The palace at Knossos was a marvel of engineering, with over 1,300 rooms, elaborate drainage systems, and wall paintings so vivid they seem almost modern. But the Minoans remain mysterious in many ways. Their writing system, called Linear A, has never been deciphered, leaving their literature, laws, and detailed history locked away from us. What we do know suggests a society quite different from later European civilizations, one that seems to have worshipped female deities, valued artistic beauty over military conquest, and maintained peace for centuries without massive fortifications or warrior imagery. On mainland Greece, a different civilization was rising. The Mycenaeans, a more militaristic people who spoke an early form of Greek and built heavily fortified palaces at sites like Mycenae and Tiryns. Unlike the peaceful Minoans, Mycenaean art is filled filled with scenes of warfare, hunting, and heroic deeds. Their society was organized around warrior kings who controlled territories through military force and complex bureaucracies. The Mycenaeans left us something the Minoans didn't: decipherable writing. Their Linear B tablets, cracked by cryptographer Michael Ventris in 1952, reveal a highly organized society with detailed records of livestock, land tenure, and military obligations. These tablets give us our first direct glimpse into European political and economic systems, showing sophisticated administration that managed resources across entire kingdoms. Most remarkably, the Mycenaeans seem to be the people behind some of Europe's most enduring stories. The Trojan War, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, likely reflects real conflicts between Mycenaean Greeks and the city of Troy around 1200 BCE. Archaeological evidence from Troy shows a city destroyed by warfare at exactly the time period described in Greek legend, suggesting that Europe's first great epic poems may preserve actual historical memories. But both civilizations met sudden, mysterious ends around 1100 BCE. The Minoan palaces were destroyed, possibly by natural disasters, invasions, or internal collapse. The Mycenaean world dissolved in what archaeologists call the Bronze Age collapse, a period of widespread destruction that affected civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. Palaces were abandoned, trade networks broke down, and writing systems disappeared, plunging Greece into a dark age that lasted for centuries. Yet the influence of these Bronze Age civilizations lived on. The Minoans' artistic traditions influenced later Greek art, while their maritime expertise contributed to the Mediterranean's enduring importance as a highway of cultural exchange. The Mycenaeans' heroic traditions became the foundation of Greek mythology and literature, preserving concepts of honor, heroism, and divine intervention that would shape European culture for thousands of years. When Greece finally emerged from its dark age around 800 BCE, it carried forward elements from both civilizations: the Minoan love of beauty and maritime trade, and the Mycenaean traditions of heroic warfare and organized kingdoms. But the Greeks would transform these inheritances into something entirely new, creating innovations in politics, philosophy, and art that continue to influence the world today. The rise of ancient Greece marked one of the most extraordinary developments in human history, the birth of ideas and institutions that still shape our world today. But Greek civilization didn't emerge in a vacuum. It grew from the ashes of the Bronze Age collapse, combining inherited traditions with revolutionary new concepts that would transform not just Europe, but human civilization itself. Around 800 BCE, Greece began to reorganize itself into independent city-states called polis. Each polis was like a small nation, controlling a city and the surrounding countryside with its own government, laws, and patron deity. This fragmented political landscape might seem chaotic, but it created a laboratory for political experimentation that produced some of humanity's most important innovations. The most famous of these experiments happened in Athens, where citizens developed democracy, literally rule by the people. This wasn't the representative democracy we know today, but direct democracy, where male citizens gathered in the agora to debate and vote on every major decision. The idea that ordinary people could govern themselves was revolutionary in a world dominated by kings and aristocrats. But Greek democracy had strict limitations. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from political participation, and the system sometimes devolved into mob rule. The trial and execution of the philosopher Socrates in 399 BCE demonstrated democracy's potential for injustice, as citizens voted to kill one of history's greatest thinkers on charges of corrupting youth and introducing new gods. Yet despite its flaws, Athenian democracy introduced concepts that remain fundamental to modern political thought. The idea that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed, that citizens have both rights and responsibilities, and that political power should be distributed rather than concentrated in the hands of a single ruler. While Athens experimented with democracy, Sparta developed a completely different system based on military discipline and social control. Spartan society was organized around creating the perfect warrior, with boys removed from their families at age 7 to begin harsh military training. This system produced soldiers of legendary skill and courage, but at the cost of individual freedom and cultural development. The contrast between Athens and Sparta represented two different visions of human society, one emphasizing intellectual freedom and and civic participation, the other prioritizing social order and military strength. This tension between freedom and security, individual rights and collective discipline would become a recurring theme in European political thought. Greek achievements extended far beyond politics. In philosophy, thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle developed methods of rational inquiry that became the foundation of Western intellectual tradition. Socrates' relentless questioning, Plato's exploration of ideal forms and justice, and Aristotle's systematic approach to logic and natural science created frameworks for understanding reality that scholars still use today. Greek contributions to mathematics and science were equally profound. Pythagoras developed the mathematical relationships that bear his name, while Euclid created the geometrical proofs that dominated mathematical education for over 2,000 years. Greek astronomers calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy and developed models of planetary motion that remained influential until the scientific revolution. In art and architecture, the Greeks established principles of proportion, balance, and beauty that continue to influence artists and architects today. The Parthenon in Athens, built in the 5th century BCE, remains one of the world's most admired buildings. Its mathematical precision and elegant proportions, creating a sense of perfect harmony that has inspired countless imitations. Greek literature produced works of enduring power and beauty. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey established epic poetry as a literary form, while Greek tragedians like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides explored themes of fate, justice, and human suffering that resonate across cultures and centuries. Greek theatre didn't just entertain, it served as a form of civic education, helping citizens think through moral and political dilemmas. Religion and mythology played central roles in Greek life, but in ways that differed markedly from other ancient cultures. Greek gods were anthropomorphic. They looked and acted like humans, complete with flaws, jealousies, and petty rivalries. This made them more relatable than the distant, all-powerful deities of other cultures, but it also meant they couldn't serve as perfect moral examples. Greek religious practice emphasized ritual and civic participation rather than personal salvation or moral transformation. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years in honor of Zeus, brought together athletes from across the Greek world in a celebration of physical excellence and cultural unity that transcended political boundaries. Despite their cultural achievements, the Greek city-states remained politically fragmented and often at war with each other. The devastating Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, 431 to 404 BCE, weakened both cities and left Greece vulnerable to conquest by Philip II of Macedonia and his son Alexander the Great. Alexander's conquests spread Greek culture across a vast empire stretching from Egypt to India, creating the Hellenistic world where Greek ideas mixed with local traditions. Though Alexander's empire fragmented after his death, Greek cultural influence persisted, providing the foundation for Roman civilization and ultimately shaping the intellectual traditions of medieval and modern Europe. The Greeks gave Europe its first systematic approaches to philosophy, science, politics, and art. Their emphasis on rational inquiry, civic participation, and human dignity became core values of European civilization. Even when later peoples rejected or modified Greek ideas, they did so in dialogue with Greek thought, making ancient Greece an unavoidable reference point for European intellectual development. If Greece gave Europe its intellectual foundations, Rome provided the political and legal structures that held the continent together for over 1,000 years. The Roman Empire was not just a military conquest, it was a civilization-building project that transformed diverse peoples into a unified whole, creating institutions and identities that outlasted the empire itself. Rome began as a small city-state in central Italy, founded according to legend in 753 BCE by Romulus and Remus. For its first 2.5 centuries, Rome was ruled by kings, but in 509 BCE, the Romans expelled their last king and established a republic based on shared power and civic virtue. The Roman Republic was a complex system designed to prevent any single person from gaining too much power. Authority was divided among elected magistrates, a senate of former officials, and popular assemblies where citizens could vote on laws and policies. The highest magistrates, called consuls, served for only 1 year and always worked in pairs, each able to veto the other's decisions. This system worked remarkably well for nearly 5 centuries, enabling Rome to conquer most of the Mediterranean world while maintaining internal stability. Roman citizens took pride in their civic duties, serving in the army without pay and participating in public life as a matter of honor. The Roman ideal of virtues, courage, honesty, and devotion to the common good created a culture of public service that sustained the Republic through numerous crises. But Rome's very success created problems that ultimately destroyed the Republic. Conquering vast territories brought enormous wealth to Rome, but it was distributed unequally, creating a class of super-rich politicians while small farmers were ruined by cheap grain from conquered provinces. The army, once composed of citizen soldiers, became professional legions loyal to their commanders rather than the state. Ambitious generals like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar began using their armies to pursue political power, leading to a series of civil wars that tore the Republic apart. Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE was meant to preserve the Republic, but it only led to more civil war until Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, defeated all rivals and became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Roman Empire that Augustus established in 27 BCE was one of history's most successful political creations. At its height, it controlled territory from Britain to Iraq, encompassing perhaps 65 million people, speaking dozens of languages and following countless local traditions. Yet this diverse population was unified under Roman law, defended by Roman legions, and connected by Roman roads and aqueducts. Roman engineering was perhaps the empire's most visible achievement. Roman roads, built to last for centuries, connected every corner of the empire to Rome itself, enabling rapid communication and military movement. Roman aqueducts brought fresh water to cities across the empire, while Roman concrete enabled the construction of massive buildings like the Pantheon and Colosseum that still inspire awe today. Roman law was equally important, though less visible. Roman jurists developed legal principles that remain fundamental to Western legal systems. The presumption of innocence, the right to legal counsel, the distinction between public and private law, and the concept that laws should be written down and applied equally to all citizens. The Roman legal code, eventually compiled in Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis, became the foundation for legal systems across Europe. Perhaps most importantly, Rome became the vehicle through which Christianity spread across Europe. Initially, Christians were persecuted as a dangerous cult that threatened Roman religious traditions and political stability. But by the 4th century CE, Christianity had become so widespread that Emperor Constantine converted and made it the empire's official religion. This transformation changed both Christianity and the Roman Empire. Christianity gained the institutional structure and intellectual sophistication of Roman culture, while Rome gained a unifying religion that could bind together its diverse populations. The merger of Christian faith and Roman organization created the foundation for medieval European civilization. But even the mighty Roman Empire couldn't last forever. By the 3rd century CE, the empire faced mounting problems: economic inflation, military expenses, political instability, and pressure from barbarian tribes along its borders. The empire grew too large to govern effectively, leading to its division into Western and Eastern halves in 285 CE. The Western Roman Empire, centered in Rome, struggled with invasions, civil wars, and economic collapse. Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, and others, began settling within Roman territory, sometimes as allies, sometimes as conquerors. These weren't simple invasions, but complex population movements driven by climate change, pressure from other tribes, and the search for better opportunities. In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, traditionally marking the end of the Western Roman Empire. But this wasn't a sudden collapse. It was the culmination of a long transformation as Roman and Germanic cultures gradually merged. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law and Greek learning while developing its own distinctive culture. Byzantium served as a bridge between Europe and Asia, maintaining trade routes and diplomatic connections that kept European civilization linked to the wider world. Rome's legacy shaped Europe in countless ways. Latin became the basis for Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, while Roman law influenced legal systems across the continent. Roman concepts of citizenship, civic duty, and imperial authority provided models for later European states. Even the Catholic Church